Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
But can we change things if we do it differently? What's happened's happened.
One thing this job has taught me is that truth is stranger than fiction.
Love is the one thing we're capable of perceiving that transcends dimensions of time and space.
What year is this?
What year do you think it is?
1996.
That's the future, James. Do you think you're living in the future?
Well, I work in metaphysics generally, but in particular, I'm interested in the nature of time and temporal experience, and I guess that's why I'm here talking about time travel films. Back to the Future, 1985.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
It really does investigate the idea of kind of changing the past. So Marty McFly accidentally kind of messes with what goes on in the past, and as a result, he starts to disrupt the relationship between his own parents. And obviously this is a giant problem, because if his parents don't get together, then he never gets born, and then he's not there in the past because he will not exist in the future in order to travel back. It really brings to life something that philosophers worry about, which is this so-called grandfather paradox. If you travel back into the past and you change something which results in you failing to be born, and the most notable way of doing that, of course, is to kill your grandfather, then there's this kind of paradox, because it's both the case that you did travel back in time, after all, you're the reason that your grandfather died. On the other hand, it can only be the case that you kill him if you exist, but if you kill him, then you don't exist. Interstellar, which is 2014.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
So it follows the story of, Joseph Cooper, who's trying to find a wormhole to escape a sort of dying Earth. What I like about this film is that it kind of explores what it would be like to be somewhere near a kind of supermassive black hole. The science about black holes is kind of right. So we do know that, in fact, the perspective from people close to black holes is very different from our perspective further away, that you get this kind of quite radical time dilation, and you see that in the film. It's really kind of bringing to life this phenomenon, which is a very peculiar phenomenon, right? This idea that time is somehow passing at a different rate depending on where you are relative to a black hole. That's weird. And they kind of explore the implications of that in a really nice way when the crew come back from the black hole, and everyone else is different, has aged differently from them. And then number 3 is Tenet.
One of these bullets is like us, traveling forwards through time. The other one's going backwards. A type of inverse radiation triggered by nuclear fission. Someone's manufacturing them in the future. They're streaming back at us.
I don't know how true to life the kind of science of these kind of reversed objects really is, but it's very carefully thought through. It's another one of these consistent time travel films where there's kind of no changing of the past. The film kind of explores seeing these various events unfold from the perspective of the same person, but sometimes from the perspective of the person moving forward, and sometimes from the perspective moving back. And in fact, sometimes you even see the forward person meeting the backwards person. There's the great scene where you first see it from the perspective of people moving in one direction. It's kind of a car chase. And of course, you see everything in reverse, because what's backwards from one perspective is forwards from the other. And that's done really nicely. That brings us to number 2, 12 Monkeys. It is one of the best examples of a consistent time travel story. You've got this causal loop where James Cole goes back in time. So he's sent back in time because there's this deadly virus. Everyone is aware that he is not going to be able to prevent the viral outbreak because it's happened. We already know it's happened. It's a massive disaster. But what he's sent back to do is to gain information which they can then use in the future. In trying to elicit information about the group, he actually inspires the person he's talking to become the person who becomes the head of this 12 Monkeys group. And that in turn is what leads them to believe falsely that this is the group that have released the virus. It's both the case that information they have about the past, about the 12 Monkeys, causes them to send James Cole back to that time in the past, but it's also the case that him going back in time is the very thing that creates that information. And that's the sense in which there's a loop, right? That the past is what causes the future, but the future is also what causes the past. My favourite film is Predestination. One character turns out to be kind of three people in this story, which is tantalisingly done.
I don't get out and meet a lot of new people.
Why not?
I don't know, I just don't.
We have a time traveller who turns out to be both her own mother and her own father through a very complicated series of events. It invites you to think carefully about how do we make sense of that? The main character, Jane, she tells a terrible, sad story about someone she meets and falls in love with, and then she gets abandoned by this person, and this is crushing for her. Turns out that the person who meets her and later abandons her is herself in the future, once she's sort of presenting as a man. And that must be a very striking experience for him, and it's very nicely portrayed in that scene. But what's really interesting is that, of course, she says what she was always going to say, and he then says all of the things that he in fact said, even though he remembers all of those things. The kind of message of the film is, well, of course he said those things. He must have said those things because she remembered him saying them, and she couldn't have remembered them saying them if he didn't say them. But by the time he says them, it seems to him as though he's kind of freely acting. It's a really nice exploration of free will and decision. And so that's why it's my number one pick.